Today, we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating and, let's be honest, a highly controversial text. It's from an author who decided the only way forward for him was to just leave America behind. He frames it as this big search for a new life, and his story is a really provocative take on gender, culture, and, what it even means to belong somewhere.
And this one sentence, right here, this is basically the key that unlocks his entire argument. It's the central conflict that he claims pushed him to pack his bags and start completely over on the other side of the world. It's a bold statement, for sure, very confrontational, and it really sets the stage for everything that's about to follow.
All right, so here's the game plan for breaking this all down. First, we're going to look at how the author even justifies making this choice. Then, we'll dig into his specific complaints. After that, we'll explore his new life in Japan, this life-altering vow he makes, and finally, the different kind of relationship he says he found there.
Okay, so first things first, the author is very clear on this point. He does not see leaving the United States as being un-American. Actually, he argues it's part of this long, maybe not often talked about, American tradition of fleeing what you see as persecution to find a better life somewhere else.
And to make his point, he draws some deeply controversial parallels from history. He actually equates his own escape from what he calls anti-male bigotry to Europeans leaving colonies to live with Native Americans, Black Americans escaping slavery via the Underground Railroad, and even draft dodgers fleeing the Vietnam War. In his mind, these are all basically the same act of self-preservation.
So what was he running from exactly? I mean, what was so bad? Well, this next part lays out his specific case against the social dynamics that he was experiencing back in the United States.
And his list of grievances, wow, they are pointed and they are absolute. He claims American society is just filled with anti-male bigotry and what he calls a faux equality that really only benefits women. He describes these hostile encounters, a constant fear of being falsely accused of something, and in the end, he concludes he was living among, and these are his words, misandric bigots.
And what this really gets at is just how deeply alienated he felt. I mean, he uses a clinical psychological term, aversion therapy, to describe his everyday social life. So for him, this wasn't just, a minor annoyance. He's painting a picture of something that was deeply painful and damaging to him.
And it all kind of comes to a head in this one really intense story he tells. He's on a train in Japan, of all places, and has this hostile run-in with two loud American women. He claims one of them was pressing up against him, and when she wouldn't move after he told her to back off, something he calls his alter ego, a persona he literally names Evil Guy, just took over. He says he violently shoved both of them to the floor, publicly accused them of being thieves, and then just calmly walked off the train. For him, this wasn't just losing his temper. It was this righteous confirmation of the exact behavior he'd left America to get away from.
Okay, so he's laid out the problem as he sees it. So what's the solution? For him, it was a complete and total restart in a fictionalized Japanese city he decides to call Michinoshi. And this is where his search for a new life really kicks off.
And the way he describes his arrival, it's almost like a fairy tale. He lands right in the middle of cherry blossom season, he's immediately welcomed by his colleagues, and he finds that his social interactions are just overwhelmingly positive and respectful. This timeline of immediate success is such a sharp contrast to the aversion therapy he talks about back in the States.
And this quote, man, it just lays it all out there. It's the core contrast he's trying to build through the whole text. He uses his own unfiltered, pretty aggressive language to draw a line in the sand. On one side, you have his Japanese colleagues who he calls feminine, polite, and smart. And on the other, what he calls the proud to be a bitch she-beasts back home.
So as he's settling into this new life, his thinking starts to shift a little bit. He goes from just talking about personal experiences to trying to back it all up with numbers, with data. And this leads him to make what he calls a sacred vow, a decision that would basically define the rest of his life.
He frames this entire decision around this one pretty provocative question. From a purely statistical point of view, is marrying an American woman a risk that's just not worth taking?
Now, what's really interesting here is how he even gets to this number. He takes the statistic that says roughly 60% of American marriages end in divorce. Then he takes another one that says women initiate about 75% of those divorces. He just multiplies them together, does his own math, and lands on this 45% chance that a wife will just decide on her own to end the marriage.
And for him, a 45% chance that the other person just walks away? That's not just a bad bet, it's catastrophic.
He uses this incredibly dramatic life-or-death comparison to really hammer home how completely unacceptable he finds those odds.
And he doesn't stop there. He argues the whole system is rigged. He claims the legal system basically creates a financial incentive for women to get divorced, that men risk losing everything, their assets, their kids, and that ultimately they're treated as nothing more than walking wallets. And all of this leads him to take that vow to never, ever marry an American woman. Okay, so if that's what he's running from, what is he running to? What's the alternative? Well, in this final part of his story, he presents the relationships that he builds in Japan as the antidote to everything he left behind, a whole new model for connection.
And the foundation for all of this is a concept he calls reciprocal giving. He describes it as this natural, mutual give and take of small kindnesses. He's just blown away when a female coworker brings him coffee without being asked, or when his girlfriend, Haruna, remembers his favorite kind of beer and just buys it for him. To him, these really simple acts represent a massive cultural difference.
So this slide really just puts it all side by side. This is the world according to him. He paints American relationships as just thankless and transactional, a place where men are basically disposable. And by contrast, he describes his relationships in Japan as being built on mutual respect, gratitude, kindness, and shared pleasure.
And in the end, it all comes down to this one moment with his girlfriend, Haruna. This is like the final piece of the puzzle for him. When she tells him she's attracted to him simply because he's a kind person, his reaction is just total shock and disbelief. This one simple statement, in his eyes, proves that he's finally found the world he was looking for, a world where, as he puts it, being a nice guy is actually a good thing.
So the author frames his whole journey as a search for mutual respect. And look, while his methods and his conclusions are clearly very controversial, his story does tap into something bigger. It kind of forces us to ask, in a world that feels more and more disconnected, what does his extreme solution tell us about that universal and often pretty lonely search for a genuine human connection?